Everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Skill RPA. In this video series, we are going to deal with RE framework implementation, building, from scratch, by taking a sequence and building step by step RE framework in our this complete series. And here, let us see what are the tasks or we will be covering up as part of this series. Building framework skeleton using state machines. And after that, we are going to see what is config file, config dictionary object, and we are going to discuss about oops, yeah, so config dictionary object. And in this video, we are going to cover how we will work with the dictionary objects and what actually the dictionary objects and all. And we are going to build individual workflows of framework. So whatever the workflows we are going to have in our framework as part of RE framework, we are going to build individual workflows, each and every workflow from scratch, and invoking the workflows inside RE framework. So whatever we developed in the previous sessions, the individual workflows, and we are going to integrate that in order to form our RE framework. And after that, and before coming to this, the individual frameworks, right? We will be covering prereq objects, which are like prerequisite objects. We are going to cover. And this will be before this. Yeah, after the config, we are going to cover prerequisite objects such as assets and queues. And what we'll be discussing about what are assets, what are queues, and how we are going to utilize them and their advantage as well. And once we're done with all the invoking of the workflows and the integration is done, then we are going to discuss about what is the advantage and why let me just put this in this way. What is the advantage of RE framework? Rather, we can say instead of advantages, when do we choose RE framework for our implementation? And what are the criteria and what are the different workflows we have and why we choose RE framework? And then we are going to see how to modify RE framework for our custom projects. By default, RE frameworks will work with orchestrator queues, which we are going to discuss by that time. And we will be changing the RE framework without the queues as well. And then we will take a use case to implement RE framework with the queues and without queues. So these are the different tasks which we are going to perform or complete in this as part of this series. So the expectation is like by end of the series, you should be able to comfortably implement the RE framework in the real time projects and should be knowing each and every concept of RE framework and why we are doing it, because we are going to build this RE framework from the scratch, um, by taking a empty sequence project, and each and every concept of this we are going to build of our own step by step. So without further delay, let us first set up the skeleton using the state machines. And here, in order to build that, like what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an empty sequence. So though we have the framework template ready, and we are going to take an empty process in order to build this RE framework. So I'll be giving the name as RE framework from scratch. And the description we can say building RE framework from scratch. You can say step by step. So in terms of compatibility, right, we have three compatibilities. One is Windows legacy, and the other is Windows, and the other is the cross platform. So Windows legacy is going to be phased out from the next enterprise release. And for now, we have what the enterprise release we have is 2022.10, and the next enterprise release we are expecting in April, which will be 2023.4. And from that, you won't find this Windows legacy, and you are going to say only the Windows and the cross platform. And Windows like is to run on your Windows system, and a cross platform. As of now, it is supporting the Linux as well in order to execute your tasks. So we are selecting this Windows, and we are going with the. We can select anything like either VB or C sharp. It doesn't make much difference. So we are going to create this process. So our studio is got open, and if we see this main, let me just minimize this. Yeah. So we have a sequence project which we taken up, and we want to have a different workflow, right? Like in the new, we can find different workflow sequence, flowchart, and state machines. So I want to delete this, and directly we cannot delete the main file because the project should have at least one main file. So I'll rename this underscore old for time being, and I'm going to create a state machines workflow, a new workflow, and here I can write main. So this will serve as our main for our implementation. Let me close this, and from this project, what I need to do is I cannot delete this directly because it's already a main, because main will be considered as an entry point for the execution. As soon as we start running the project, it will be executed from the main. We can say it's an entry point for the execution. So we cannot delete the entry point. So what I will do is I'll just make this main.yaml as a main. So here we have an option. If you right click, and here we have an option set as main. So we'll just click this, and now we could able to delete this. Yes. So now it got deleted, and now we have only one main file, which is of state machines. So let us click on open main flow. So here is our state machines workflow, on top of which we are going to build our RE framework. And like we have only two state activities. If I type state here, I can see state, final state. So we need to select the state machines is a template, like how we have a sequence and flow chart, right? In the similar way, it is state machines. If I drag and drop this, you'll find the same again, like whatever we are seeing right now, we are going to see the same. So now we need to work with only these two. So by default, we should have at least two states needs to be there in order for the state machine to work. So one is state and other is the final state. And the final state is the mandatory in order to have. If you see here, now we could able to see in validation error, it is saying that it should have an initial state. Initial state is nothing but the state activity. So we are dragging and dropping this here. So now we got the state and now we have the validation errors again. Okay. And we are considering this as initialization state, right? So we will be writing this initialization state. So now this is the initialization state, and we have a validation error. It is saying that it should have at least one transition because when we are working with the state machines, the basic funda of the state machines is it will work in the or like we can say the group of activities will be under one state, and from one state to the other state, it will move based on the transition conditions. Now it was in confusion state that what needs to be executed after this state, right? And if we see here, it is saying that like we have a validation errors, and here it is saying that it should have at least one transition. Let us suppose if I drag and drop one more state here, now here again you are going to get that at least I should have one more transition. So like it is like a never ending process. And we can navigate it back to the initialization state, but the problem is it will go in an infinite loop. So in order to stop the process at a particular point, we need to have a final state. And if I keep that final state here, and I can just have a transition from initializations to final state. So how I can do that is I just need to drag and drop here. So now it got connected. And now if you see, right, we don't have any validation errors. So the basic funda of the state machines is we need to have at least two states and the final state and the state. And why the final state is it doesn't require the transition to another state. If we keep in any other state, right, it requires a transition and it will be keep on moving into an infinite loop. So, but in final state, it doesn't require any transition. It needs to have only the input transition. It's not outgoing transition. So that's why we call this as end process state. So now we have the state, but see, when we want to move from one state to the other state, we should have some um, condition on which condition it should go. So before going for that, let us try to understand the criteria is what we are going to have. If I double click here, if we see here, we have entry criteria and exit criteria, and we have the transitions. So how it is like what we need to do when we are entering into this and what it needs to do while it is exiting from this state. Okay. And generally we generally keep the log messages or something, or even we can perform the actions also. And because we have two criteria here, both entry and exit, which means it should have an incoming transition and outgoing transition as well. If we open this, we have only entry criteria here, which means like it is having only the incoming transition. There is no outgoing transition here. And if you see here, we have the transition. So if the condition is T1 and it should go to the end process state. So this is how the transitions will happen. So how we can put this condition? This is the transition line we have from one state to the other. And if we double click on this, here we are going to get the conditions. So this T1 is the transition condition 1, and we can put this condition which will return the Boolean true or false, and it will go to this transition. And we can have multiple transitions as well. And we will see how we are going to get the another transition when we drag and drop other state as well. And let us take one more state. and I can just put it like this. So now I have three states, and of course, like we can ignore this because it should have one transition. So it requires that. But now if we see here, we got the validation error because the reason is we have transition condition one and transition condition two, and we didn't give any transitions the condition expressions. That is the reason for which we are seeing this validation. And now we need to give the conditions because previously we have only one, but now we have two. Let me expand this. So here T1 and T2. And let us suppose we gave a condition which is matching both T1 and T2. So what it will happen? Because we have two transitions, and if both the conditions are meeting the criteria of true, and what it is going to happen? So it will go to the end process. Let us suppose even this condition is true and this condition is also true. In that scenario, it will go to the end process because the conditions in this transition will be evaluated in a sequential order. And as soon as it gets the true value in any of the transition condition, it will directly jump into that transition and it won't evaluate the other conditions. And we call this, let us call this state as get transaction data. And from the initialization state, there are two exit points, there are two transition conditions. One is from initialization to the get transaction data state, and the other is initialization to end process state. So in terms of system exception, it will go to the end process state. In terms of successful, it will go to the get transaction data state. So for that, like we need to have a variable, uh, which we can call it as system exception. And when it comes to system exception, the variable type will be system exception. System.exception. And we select the side. Now we can put the transition conditions because we created a variable. Because in case of system exception, it should go to the end process. And if there is no exception, it should go to the get transaction data state. So let us put the transition conditions now. And here it is to go to the end process in case if the system exception is available, which means like it should not be nothing. So what we will do is not nothing. What I'm saying is like if the system exception variable is having some value, which means like if it is not nothing, which means like it is having a value, it should go to the end process, which means there is a system exception. So here what we will write is like we can rename the labels as well. We can say system exception. Let us come back and see. See here, it is system exception. And in case if we have a system exception, it will be coming to end process state. And let us go here. And in the transition 2, we will be saying that like if the system exception is nothing, which means like if there is no system exception, it will go to the get transactions data state. So if system exception is nothing, we are going to get transaction data state. So here we can say successful. You can write it as success. So now we're done with the transition conditions for the initialization state. And now we need to work on this validation error. So it is saying that we need to have one transition from this, right? So let us take one more state, which we call it as process transaction. Let me expand this. And now we need to have a transition from get transaction data to process transaction. And we are going to have only one transition from get transaction data to the process transaction, and one more transition from get transaction data to the end transaction, end process. And how it will go the transition from get transaction data to the end or get transaction data to the process. So generally, let us have a small discussion here. Like how we are going to work is like we are going to work with the transaction data. And if I have some data to work, I'll be coming to the process transaction. If I don't have any data to process, I should end the process, right? So for that, like we need to have a variable which we call it as a transaction item. So this is the variable which we are working on. And for this transaction item, I'm going to take a variable type of Q item. And for now, like you can just ignore the data type for the transaction item. Just remember that whatever the transaction data we have, that transaction data, like which needs to be processed, that we consider it as a transaction item as a variable. And we will be discussing about this Q item type and all those things in the further sessions. For now, just consider this transaction item as the data which we want to process in our automation. So we have the transaction item variable created. And in these transaction conditions, if we have the transaction data, we will need to go to the process transaction. And if we don't have the data, we should go to the end process. So let us put the transition conditions now. And here we are going to the end process, which means we don't have any data, no data, which means the transaction item is nothing. So if the transaction item is nothing, which means like if we don't have any transaction data, we are going to the end process state, right? And now we want to put the condition for this. And in the T1, which means we have a transaction data available. We can name it with any of the label names, whatever we want to have. So here, in this case, transaction item is not nothing, which means like if I have a transaction data, I want to go to the process transaction because I need to process that data, correct? And from here, the process transaction, we want to go to the get transaction data. Now all the validations were gone. And now let us do one thing. Let me just minimize it for 50 and let us just have a drag and drops. And later I'll just make it normal. Okay, let me make it 100% now. So I just taken only two transitions. One is to the get transaction data and the other is to the initialization state. But from the process transaction, there are three possible things. And in two scenarios, it will go to the get transaction data state. And in one scenario, it will go to the initialization state. And let me explain you the reason why we have two to the get transaction and one is to the initialization state. So let us discuss, before going for that, let us discuss what actually the each of the state is doing. And then we can have these three conditions in place. So the initialization state, what actually it will do is like it will read all the configuration settings, like it will read all the information which is required in our process, and also it will initialize all the applications. That's why we call it as an initialization state, because it get all the data required for the process, the configurations, and also it will open all the applications and it will make the applications ready for the process to be implemented or process to be automated. So here we will be having opening of all the applications and reading all the settings. And in case if any error occurred when it is opening the application, if the application is not open, there is no point of automating the process, right? There is no point of going further to the next steps. That is the reason for which it will go to the end process. If there is no, if there is an error when you are opening an application or when you are getting a configuration data for the process, there is no point of going to the further steps. So that's why it will go to the end process. And in case if everything is successful and if the applications are opened and if you got all the data, then it will be going to get transaction data. So in the get transaction data state, what it will try to do is it will retrieve the transaction data which needs to be utilized in our process to be automated. Like when we are automating some process, we should have some data in order to make that happen. Let us suppose if you are saying that like you want to make an entry into a web application. So to fill the form, right, you need to have a data. So that data will be retrieved in this state. And let us suppose if you have data, then we will be going for the process, like whatever the typing or like whatever the process we want to do. So it will go to this process. If there is no data, there is no point of going to the process transaction, right? Like if you don't have data, there is nothing to be automated. So that's the reason for which in case of no data, it will go to the end process. And in the process transaction, like we are going to automate our complete process. That's what actually the execution of the process we call it as. And here there are two conditions here. One is successful and the other is failure. So in terms of successful, what we need to do is we need to go and get the next available data to be automated. So we can call this as successful, right? And in the failure scenario, right, there is two possible failures. One is because of the data validation, and other is because if the applications are not responding or some application-based errors, right? One is data error and the other is application error. And here in our programming languages, if we have a data error, we call that as business rule exception. So because the exception is because of the incorrect data, we call that as a business rule exception. And other than related to the data, if we are getting any exception, that will be considered under system exception. So we already have a variable for the system exception. And now let us create one more variable, which is business exception. And the data type will be business exception. So which is business rule exception. And let us select this. Now we have the variable also created for the business rule exception. So let us suppose if there is an error in the data, we are going to go to the get transaction data to get the next transaction data. Let us suppose we have 5 records to be processed and we are having an incorrect data at record number 2. I don't want to stop my complete process because I want to process the next available records, which we can say that like that might be a valid, right? So because of that, we will be going to the get transaction data and to get the next available data to process. And the other scenario of the error is application exception. In that case, we are considering that the applications are not working as expected. If you want to make entry into some application, if the application is not properly working, we cannot do anything. Like let us suppose if the application is like when we are working on any applications, right? Frequently we will be seeing that the application went into no responding mode. So in such a scenarios, we cannot work on that application immediately. So what we will do is we'll close all those applications and then we will go to the init state. And because we got some error because of the application, so that's the reason for which we are going to close those applications and reopen it in the init state, because the initialization state will it will open all the applications, right? And after that, it will come to the get transaction and it will retrieve the next transaction data. So this is how the flows or the transitions will work in the RE framework or a state machines for this particular RE framework template. So let us put the transitions for all these three and let us put the conditions. And here it is going to the get transaction data state. So for that, what let us consider the first is success. Success in the sense we should not have both the business rule exception and we should not have the system exception. So business exception is nothing and system exception is nothing. So if both are nothing, which means like we don't have the business rule exception and we don't have a system exception, which means the success criteria. It will go to the get transaction data, correct? And we have a business exception. And let us name this as where it is going, get transaction data. Let us write this as a business exception. And in terms of business exception, we put that business rule exception is not nothing. In case, what actually this means is if the business rule exception is not nothing means like we got a business rule exception. So in that case, we are going to the get transaction data state. And here it is system exception. Which means the system exception variable is not nothing. Which means like we encountered a system exception. So in this case, it will go to the init state. And if you see here, all the in the three transitions, these two are common. Then what actually makes the difference? See, when we are moving out from the transition of process transaction, it will update the status as per the success or a business rule or exception, system exception. That is why we have two different transition conditions because we want to make some update here. Or else everything will be same under these two categories, successful and the business rule exception. And now let us suppose we are in the initialization state and we came to the get transaction data state and we came to the process transaction and here we got the system exception. So we will be going here into the initialization state and we completed this initialization state. And if we see the transition conditions here, we are saying that the system exception is not nothing will become true. The reason is here we got the exception and this system exception variable will hold some exception and it is having value. So in that case, this condition will become true and it will go to the end process. Though we tried closed all the applications and we tried to reinitialize all the applications, though the state becomes successful because it is a variable at highest scope, so it still holds some data and it will go to the end process state. To avoid that, what we will do is in the entry, we will put an assign activity and we will assign nothing to system exception variable, which means like we are clearing whatever the data we have in the system exception. Oh, there is a spelling mistake. We put this as system. Okay. If you rename from the variables, it will be automatically get reflected. So now what will happen is we got an error here and we came to the initialization state and we marked it as system exception as nothing. So now based on the status or whatever we are performing in the init state, that will get reflected. If it is successful, it will go to the get transaction data state. This is how we are going to clear. That's why we need to clear out the system exception variable and we should have like we will be getting the proper transitions based on the activities or the actions performed in the initialization state. And here, in case of business rule exception, it is holding a data business rule exception, and it is coming to the get transaction data state, and it is coming to the process transaction. And even though it is successful, what will happen is still this variable is having the data inside that, and we didn't clear it out. Again, it will take this route and it will update the status to the business rule exception. In order to avoid that, what we need to do is we need to have an assign activity inside this. As soon as it comes to the process transaction state, we will be clearing out this variable by assigning it to nothing. So now the transition conditions and the transitions are like completed, and now we should work on like how we are going to get these variables, because in case if there is an exception happen in the initialization state, what it will do is it will throw an error and it will directly terminate our process. So it should not happen in that way, right? So what we need to do is we just need to have a try catch here, and inside that we will be doing our all automation, and in the exception block we are going to give this. So let me do one thing. Let me give a shortcut Control T, and now this is under the try catch, right? And we need to define a catch block system.exception, and here we are going to have an assign activity system exception, and the exception is the exception. So whatever the exception we encountered in the try block, that will be catched in this catch block, and the system exception variable will be assigned with that particular exception. Now, in case if there is an exception in this particular sequence under the try block, then we are going to get the system exception variable assigned with the exception, which means like that is going to have a value inside that. So now this transition conditions will work as expected, correct? And now in almost all the states, we are going to have this try catch blocks, and here in this get transaction data state as well. And let us have a try catch block here. And in this, we are going to define a catch block. And here, what we are going to do is, here we are not going to assign it to the variables. Here, what we are going to do is, sorry, not to the system exception or a business exception. Here, if we see the conditions, right? Here we have only two conditions that we completely dependent on the transaction data. So here, if there is an exception, then we cannot proceed further, because if we are getting an exception, then we are not going to have the transaction data inside of it. So we are going to assign the transaction item to nothing, so that it will be navigated to the end process state. If everything is successful, it will come to the transaction data. Correct? So this is how we are going to have this. And in the process transaction, it is a bit different. Everywhere we have only one catch block, right? But here we are going to have two catch blocks. As we know, the try catch, we can have multiple catch blocks, and we can have different exception types. So here in the process transaction, we are having three different transitions, right? One is the business rule exception, and successful, and the system exception. So we are going to define the business rule exception. And here we are going to assign the business rule exception variable the catched exception. And we are going to have one more additional catch block, which is system exception. And we will assign this system exception variable. Now, all our transition and transition variables are assigned perfectly. Now, based on these scenarios, this transition from one state to the other state will take place, and it will start executing. And now If you see, right, like initially we don't have these symbols. As soon as we put something inside that, then these symbols are coming into the picture. So as of now, we kept the things only in the entry criteria. That's the reason for which we have this entry, because we have only in the entry. And if we have something in the exit, then we are going to have that symbol. So this is how all this state machines workflow will help us in order to build the RE framework. And RE framework is built on top of this. And now we completed our skeleton with the transition conditions and the variables, the highest slope variables, how we are using and how they are getting assigned, and how we are clearing those variables, value, data, and how the transitions from one state to the other state are taking in place. And from the next video, what we are going to do is we are going to build our individual components, and we are going to discuss about the config dictionary variable, and we are going to see on in that initialization state. And later we will go to the one state to the other state separately. And thanks for watching, and please subscribe to Skill RPA YouTube channel.